Good day, this is Dr. Firstin Sako, and in this presentation, I will discuss with you on research proposal writing, particularly part 1 of your research proposal, which is your chapter 1. Okay, your chapter 1 should include the following: background and problem statement, the research objective, research questions, hypotheses for quantitative study, study significance, definition of terms, study delimitations for quantitative study, and description of phenomenon of interest for qualitative study. Okay, so please take note of the chapter 1 introduction format. If your research is quantitative study, you need to include the following. Okay, the background of the study, statement of the problem, hypothesis, significance of the study, scope and limitations, and the definition of terms. If your study proposal is qualitative research, you should have the following. Okay, background of the study, the aim of your study or the purpose of your study, state the research question or questions, the description of the phenomenon of interest, and you also need to describe the significance of the study. For the background of the study, introduce the need for the study. So you need to set the scene and put the research in context. And in the background section of your proposal, you should be able to make the reader aware of what has already been done and what is already known in the area of interest. A description of how the literature search and assessment had been performed is also important, as the result should be what the intended research is built upon, and for you to provide justification for the present study. It should also strengthen your argument concerning the significance of your study and point out how the proposed research will augment the knowledge and why this is important. So set the scene, put the research into context. The background should also demonstrate your command of current knowledge in the field that forms the logical reason and ending in your research question. Okay, so include the possible theory applicable in the field so that the intended study can be put into a research context, and it is advisable that you focus on a nursing theory that can support your study, or that can be a theoretical framework for your study if it's quantitative, or a theoretical underpinning if it's a qualitative study. So for the significance of the study, there are some questions that can be used to assess the significance of your study. First, you look into who has an interest in the domain of inquiry. Next, you can consider what you need or what you already know about the topic, and then what has not been answered adequately in previous research and practice. And then ask also the question, how will this research add to knowledge, practice, and policy in this area? And at the beginning of the proposal, the significance of the study should be clearly stated, and it must be made clear why there is a need for the study. For the statement of the problem, research forms a circle, that is, it starts with a problem and ends with a solution to the problem. And so the researcher, or you should think about what stimulated you to research for this particular problem, and ask, are there questions about the stated problem to which answers have not been found? So you express the dilemma or troubling situation and describe it in this area, and describe it clearly why it needs investigation, and also provide a rationale for the new inquiry or for your proposed study, and then identify the nature of the problem that is being addressed and including its context and significance. Just a quick review on the 6 components of problem statements for quantitative studies. Okay, so for those who have quantitative research proposal, consider the following. Identify the problem, what is wrong with the current situation, and then the background, what is the context of the problem that readers need to understand, scope of the problem, how big is the problem, how many people are affected, consequences of the problem, what is the cost of not fixing the problem, and then for the knowledge gap, identify what information about the problem is lacking, and then proposed solution, what is the basis for believing that the proposed study would contribute to the solution of the problem. Just a quick review for writing your statement of purpose. Take note of the following buzzwords for quantitative studies. So if your study is a non-experimental design, you might need to use the word examine or explore. Okay, so to examine or explore the relationship between 2 variables. So specify the variables in your study. Remember, stating the aim, the research questions and hypotheses, and null hypothesis makes explicit the purpose of your proposed research study, and that is what the researcher hopes to achieve. Okay, that's what you want to achieve, and this is only relevant in quantitative studies. Remember, hypothesis is only relevant in quantitative studies. You don't write a hypothesis for a qualitative study. Okay, take note for those who have quantitative research proposals, your hypotheses are actually predicted answers to your research questions, and make use of this as a guide or example when you write your research questions and your research hypotheses. Remember that your hypothesis is a logical statement which the statistical results of the study either support or reject, and a hypothesis is stated in an explanatory form because it indicates the expected reference of the difference between 2 variables. So the research hypothesis may be stated in a directional or a non-directional form, and a directional hypothesis statement indicates the expected direction of results, while a non-directional one indicates no difference or no relationship. Okay, remember the characteristics of a testable hypothesis. So testable hypothesis state the expected relationship between your independent variable or the presumed cause or antecedent of your study and the dependent variable, which is the presumed effect of your study. Now, you might be wondering, how exactly do you go about developing hypotheses in your proposed quantitative study? There are 2 basic processes, induction and deduction, and these are the intellectual machinery involved in deriving hypotheses. So an inductive hypothesis is inferred from observations, and as researchers you need to observe certain patterns among phenomena and then make predictions based on the observations, while deductive hypotheses have theories or prior knowledge as a starting point, and the researcher deduces that if the theory is true, then certain outcomes can be expected. So quantitative hypotheses are predictions the researcher makes about the expected relationships among variables. Testing of hypotheses employs statistical procedures in which the investigator draws inferences about the population from a study sample. And to eliminate redundancy, it's you are advised to write only research questions or hypotheses, but not necessarily both when using quantitative proposals, unless the hypothesis build on the research questions. So choose the form based on tradition and as recommended, or whether past research indicates a prediction about outcomes. Quantitative research questions inquire about the relationships among variables that the researcher seeks to know, and they are used frequently in social science research and especially in survey studies. So in quantitative studies, research investigators use quantitative research questions and hypotheses and sometimes objectives to shape and specifically focus the purpose of the study. Okay, so here is a general question template for quantitative research questions. Try practicing on writing the quantitative research question for those with quantitative research proposals, and look into how you have stated your research questions and hypotheses. So again, if hypotheses are used, there are two forms, null and alternative. A null hypothesis represents the traditional approach. It makes a prediction that in the general population there's no relationship or no significant difference exists between groups on a variable. And the wording is like this: there is no difference or there is no relationship between the groups. So agree with your advisor as to how you are going to state your research question and hypothesis for quantitative research proposals. So some research questions are primarily descriptive, and here you can see the examples of some descriptive questions that could be answered in a study, focusing on versus use of humor. So learn from these examples and examine your research hypotheses and research questions. Okay, so for quantitative research proposal, you are to include the scope and limitations of your study in your chapter 1. So here you need to indicate the focus and the limits of your study. Additionally, for quantitative research proposal, you also need to include the operational definition of terms in your chapter 1, and here you define how the terms are used in your study. For those with qualitative research proposal, you need to include the aim of the study. So here the research purpose or goal or aim gives the broad indication of what you researchers wish to achieve in your research, and it encapsulates what precisely you intend to do. So for example, this particular aim of the study, the aim of this study is to describe the lived experience of hospital nurses during the COVID-19 crisis in the Philippines. That's an example of a research aim. Another is this one that you can see here, a statement of purpose from a qualitative study. So learn from this example on how to state the research aim of your qualitative research proposal. Here you can find buzzwords for statements of purpose, or when you write your research aim or statements of purpose. So if your research is a grounded theory, you will need to consider processes, social structures, social interactions, or the word understand, discover, develop or generate. For phenomenological studies, like some of you are using now, you can make use of the following words: experience, lived experience, meaning, and essence. For ethnographic studies, you can make use of words like culture, roles, lifeways, and cultural behavior. Still, for qualitative study proposals, you need to include the research question and state clearly the research question of your study. So introduce the question and what it is that you want to know or what it is that you want to understand, and explain the interest in the topic. So the introduction must get the attention of the reader and convince the reader of the value of your study. So this is where you must set the stage. Take note of this guide. So when you state the research question in qualitative study, mention the phenomenon of interest and then the group or population of interest. For phenomenology, ask meaning questions. For grounded theory, ask process questions, and for ethnography, ask descriptive questions about cultures. And here's another example of a research question from a phenomenological study. What is women's lived experience of fear of birth? So, example of a research question from a descriptive qualitative study. Home and colleagues conducted a descriptive qualitative study that asked, what do young older adults perceive to be the influence of primary healthcare professionals in encouraging exercise and physical activity? Okay, so when stating the research question of your qualitative study, the phenomenon of interest should be clearly presented, and the population of interest as well. And you can clearly see that in these examples. For qualitative research proposal, you also have to include the description of the phenomenon of interest. So here, you need to provide the context and the focus of your research inquiry. Describe what is known about the phenomenon and what you need to know and understand about the phenomenon of interest under inquiry. So here are the references of this presentation. Please be guided, and thank you for listening. Have a good day.